And we're back again with book club number 7, Life as an Independent Space Hauler by jasonhillwirtes. So once again, we're going to start with the synopsis, and I'll get right into it. Jace Stone had it all growing up on Earth. Everything was taken from him, and he was pressed into military service as a fighter pilot. A few years later, Jace had gotten out of the military service and worked on a corporate freighter. He has grown to love space and plans to never return to Earth. Growing dissatisfied with corporate life, Jace finds the necessary backing to go independent. Thus, he begins the life of an independent freight hauler. The story is inspired by Nathan Lowell's Golden Age of the Solar Clipper series, Firefly, and some anime. Alright, the last is just a note from the writer explaining his inspirations. Overall, synopsis, not very descriptive. I feel like there's some failings here. We could have definitely done with a bit more explanation as to what his life like growing up on Earth was. Why, the press into service as a military fighter pilot, great. I think that sentence by itself explains a lot. The few years later part works for me. I think basically everything except for the very first sentence in the synopsis is okay. It works to describe the story and set the stage. The growing up on Earth part, though, definitely could have used some more explanation to give us some more depth and interest, or explanation as to what kind of setting we're stepping into. However, currently, as of recording this, we have 24 chapters. As far as I know, there is no Patreon or any advanced chapters, which definitely makes it interesting to try and, support. Currently, though, we're looking at a roughly daily updating, which is then devolved into every 3 days or every 2 days. It's been a bit sporadic. Thankfully, though, that does give us a pretty good idea of when everything comes out. Hopefully, he does continue and maintain this schedule. A not a set schedule sometimes works for writers, sometimes it doesn't. I find as long as they're consistent in size and in quality, the writer can release them whenever they want. It's great to read more stuff, especially free stuff. Overall, synopsis on the world building for this story, it's not very well done. There's a lot of inspiration. You can make it, logical leaps to get to where you're looking for. This, however, does mean that if you haven't read Nathan Lowell's Golden Age of the Solar Clipper series, Firefly, or a bunch of similar anime, it's a lot of just not a lot of things are connecting. You're not seeing those connections. However, though, it is a really interesting setting. We have corporations, we have a estranged Earth from the colonies. It does lend itself to a relatively interesting setting. I wish it was better described, either in the synopsis or in the story as we read it. Currently, as I've been reading this, we're really slow. There doesn't seem to be any major antagonistic force or any pushing directive other than being a freight hauler, which is very sad because there's no real gripping thing to read it. The characters so far are relatively bland. There's not a lot to read into them yet. There are some interesting tidbits we learn about Jace and his life on Earth, which aren't discussed really heavily at all. Earth generally is ignored or skirted around, so I feel like if we went into that a bit more, especially early on, we'd get a better gripping to the story. Yeah, other than that, Jace is the character we learned about in the one in the synopsis, but there are a few other ones which do pop up relatively quickly, which help flesh out the world. And they're well written. They're not very two-dimensional. The dialogue so far has been, if stilted, very nice to read. We don't have any super weird dialogue or really campy dialogue either, which just leads this story into being this somewhat interesting startup, which as it continues, I really hope it does improve and we get some more direction or competitive edge, that we see something change. Until then, though, I can't really recommend this. I would hopefully come back to this one as somewhere 50 to 75 installments on Royal Road, and then I would say, depending on, I'll come back to it then, and then I'll recommend it or not. As it stands, this is definitely a pass. But if you're interested in the space lifestyle, definitely let's keep following along with Jason here. well, have a wonderful day, guys, and we'll get back to you sometime later.